everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Whether you're the type of person to set New Year's resolutions or not, the new year does tend to generate a sense of new. Sometimes it's relief from the old, or permission to follow new signs in life. Is it a different job, traveling? But apparently, the new year also generates just as many strange happenings for people as any other night, if not more. Tonight, we'll learn about a very strange case of deja vu, missing time, cryptic messages, and much more. So, let's get started, shall we? The craziest thing that's personally been experienced or witnessed by me was New Year's Eve 2004. I was 15 and it was just me and my grandma Lo, who's no longer with us. We were at the house. She's bedridden at this time, but still lucid. Around 10 p.m., I turn all of our TVs to the Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve special. After turning my grandma's TV to the station, she wished me a Happy New Year, saying she wasn't sure she'd be able to keep her eyes open much longer. I knew she was a bit disappointed that year because Regis Fieldman was going to be stepping in for Dick Clark due to his stroke. I wished her a Happy New Year, and then I retreated to the living room where Dick Clark was also playing. Both of my parents were at a friend's New Year's Eve party, so I was at home mainly by choice, but also just in case of an emergency. I could dial 911 for my grandma, or she could dial it for me using her 911 emergency button, which was attached to her bed. Another button on her bed, the left-hand side, activated what I called her little call bell. This button was attached to wires, which connected at the ceiling of the home, and bells were attached to the wires, so that if she pressed the button, it would alert someone, regardless what room of the home they were in. Also, this button, it wasn't one that she could accidentally bump due to its positioning off to the side. Later that night, I was still in the living room reading with the New Year's Eve special playing in the background when my grandma rang her little call bell. I looked at the TV and I noticed it was already 11:56, so almost a couple of hours since I was last in her room. I could see that the countdown on the TV was in full effect, and we were only 4 minutes away from the big finale. As I walked down the small hallway from the living room to her room, I had the weirdest sensation, almost like the strongest sense of deja vu you could have, but nothing actually seemed familiar yet. I heard my grandma say, "I made it. Get in here." It sounded like her, absolutely, but she sounded almost too far away. Slightly confused why she sounded like that, I picked up the pace. But as I rounded the corner, my grandma was laying in bed, and she didn't look like she was awake. Her TV was on, but it seemed like the time was off, since the countdown still showed over an hour. Maybe she changed the channel, and it's replaying on some other station. At least that's what I thought as I walked over to her saying, "Grandma?" But it was clear she had somehow already dozed off. I leaned over. She was definitely breathing. I thought to myself, wow, she fell back asleep super quick. Even though it all felt a bit strange, I wasn't sure what to make of it, so I then retreated back to the living room. I sat down on the couch and started to feel strange, sort of like I had in the hallway just moments before I was back on the couch. I thought, Why does it feel like I've been here before? I looked for the remote, expecting it to be where I had last placed it, on the arm of the couch. But instead, it was in this weird position on the coffee table, where I had balanced it on a coaster to spin it around, almost an hour ago. Weird. But I just told myself I need to go to bed or something. I looked at the TV. The time was wrong on this one, too. It showed that there was over an hour before midnight, and that it was 10:56. Regis Philbin was on the screen again, rambling about the noisy, rowdy crowds, which he'd also done an hour ago. I grabbed the remote from the coaster, and I went through the channels in the TV guide. It was still showing 10:56. I went to the kitchen, and the clocks showed 10:56, and then 10:57. But nothing was showing me 11:56, as it just had. All of the clocks were showing the same time, and I had no idea what the heck was going on. The next hour, I spent intently watching the special. Not like I had before, but really watching it, not reading my book. Philbin was either repeating himself, or I was hearing the same things I had been hearing for an hour. Ashley Simpson. Maybe she'd performed twice since she was all over the show anyways, but the same song, the same performance? No. I try to prove myself wrong, but then, eventually, the real 11:56 hits. And I just know that my grandma's little call bell is going to go off. So I stand up and I start walking towards my grandma's room. I freeze in the hallway, and I have the same feeling, but this time, I know what's familiar. I know what she's going to say. And then she does. "I made it. Get in here." Only when she says it now, it sounds right. It sounds like she's just inside the room, not far away as it did earlier. I round the corner, but this time she's sitting up in bed, excited to see me and waving me over. I look at her TV, and it's got the right time on it now, 11:56, just 4 minutes till midnight. I calmly ask my grandma, "Do you remember calling me in here earlier, saying the same thing?" She told me no. She thought she'd fallen asleep almost the moment I left her room earlier, which was when I put the special on her TV hours ago. I didn't bother elaborating on what had happened as to not confuse her, but I was definitely internally freaking out. We watched the ball drop, and shortly after, my grandma fell asleep. I wasn't feeling so tired. Instead, I waited for my parents to get home, and once they were in bed, I felt like I could finally fall asleep. To this day, I'm still not sure what happened. Did I have a weird psychic experience? Or was this some weird glitch? Anyone else experience anything strange on December 31st, 2004? Because this absolutely happened to me, but it never did happen again. So this happened a couple of days ago. I was sitting in the kitchen quietly drawing when I heard the door in the garage open and close. I got up to see if my dad had gotten home, but when I checked, the door was still locked, and it showed no signs of ever being moved. I was, of course, confused at this, but I chalked it up to the fact that I was home alone in a quiet house, so I'm bound to hear something. A few minutes later, however, I see my dad walk down the hallway. I got up to tell him that he scared me with the whole locking the door again thing, but he wasn't in the hall anymore. Again, figuring he had just walked fast to the bathroom, I sat down to continue my drawing. Then, a little bit later, I hear him calling my name from the bathroom. As I got up to go see what he wanted, the front door opened and my dad stepped through. When I told him what I saw and heard, we went back to the bathroom, only to see that it was empty and again showed no sign of use. Dad said that this has happened to him before, on multiple occasions throughout his years. This is the first time for me. Anyone had this happen? Or is it just my dad and me? Back in 1998, I took a road trip with a good friend at the time from our hometown in Springer, New Mexico. Our destination was Las Vegas for a New Year's Eve party. The drive was a good 11, 12 hours, and it was one that we'd never done before, at least not alone. We left early on the morning of the 30th, knowing that we could make it to Vegas by that night if we just drove the whole way through. On the way out of town, we stopped to grab some snacks, some gas, some water, and then we thought, what the heck, let's buy ourselves a map too. It was about 20 minutes or so of driving that my friend suggested I pull out the map and get a sense of the best route. We already had our eye on I-40, but there was the possibility of staying on I-25 the whole way through. We decided we'd figure it out once we got to Santa Fe. I ended up dozing off for a bit, and I had a weird dream that I was in the car like I was, but we were driving in the opposite direction, back towards home. My friend woke me up and we were sitting outside of a gas station. The cross street read, Old Las Vegas Highway. So I knew we'd made it to Santa Fe or possibly further. While my friend went inside, I stayed in the car and decided to examine the map some more. Growing up in New Mexico, we learn a lot about Native American culture in school. It's also a huge part of the culture in general, especially as you travel inland toward the Apache and Navajo Indian reservations. We wanted to go this way on the way out of town for shopping, to visit the trading posts, and to visit St. Michael's. St. Michael's was known for having a lot of shops and a neat tourism center. So the map essentially shows me that we'll be going through both of these reservations, or at least one of them, depending which way we take. All I can think about is how cool it's going to be. My friend gets back to the car, and I tell her, let's take I-40 and go to St. Michael's. So we agree, I-40 to St. Michael's. We make it as far as Bernalillo before I have to pee. My friend pulls off to what appears to be the only building in town, which happens to be a gas station with a bathroom sign visible from the outside. I rush to the outside door and it's locked. Either someone's in there or it requires a key, so I go inside the place. It's ice cold in there and I can't figure out why, but I see the clerk and I ask to use the key to the bathroom. He tells me there isn't one. Okay. I go outside and I wait for the bathroom. It's a painful wait, but it's eventually over. I use the disgusting bathroom, and when I get back to the car, I see my friend standing on the other side of the parking lot, just staring off into the distance. I start to make my way over to her when suddenly I trip. Not a huge fall, but enough to knock me off balance a bit and take my eyes off my friend. I look back up and she's gone. But then I hear her. From behind me, I hear, "Hey, you good to go? Let's hit the road. We're burning daylight." She was walking out of the gas station in the opposite direction of where I just saw her, with more snacks. We get on the road and I can't stop thinking about what I saw. I would forget about it or try to, and then it would just creep back into my mind. I was about to say something just to get it in someone else's mind when I realized we weren't on I-40. I grabbed the map and I asked my friend, "Where are we?" Somehow she ended up on an entirely different road, but it looked like we were still en route to St. Michael's somehow, which was good. It definitely looked like it was going to add some time though, so I let her know and we agreed to just move forward. After about an hour on the road, we needed gas. It became clear that we were basically driving through a lot of nothingness, so we hoped gas was close. Just before we thought we might run out of gas, we reached a town called Farmington. My friend got gas and I talked to the clerk, asking him to give it to me straight. What's the best and fastest way to St. Michael's? He basically draws a straight line down on the map from where we are, and he says that's the way that we need to go, but that we shouldn't, that the timing isn't right. I ask him to elaborate. He doesn't. So I'm uncomfortable with the advice, but I decide to go tell my friend anyways and see what she thinks. When I walk out to the car, I notice she's no longer pumping gas, so I hop in the car. I start to tell her about our options and the creepy message from the clerk. But I notice that my friend is shocked to see me, almost scared. So I ask her, "What's up?" "I don't think we should go to Vegas anymore." I ask her, "Why?" She has a hard time saying it, but eventually she does. "Because we just told us not to?" I wasn't entirely sure what she meant by that. I hadn't even gotten as far as telling her about the clerk, so I asked her, "What do you mean?" She told me that while she was pumping gas, she was facing the road, not the store. She said she swore she saw someone, maybe 2 yards away, that looked to be wearing my exact outfit. And in that same moment, she heard my voice, and then her voice from the other side of the car. "I don't think we should go to Vegas. Yeah, we need to turn around." She turned around to face that direction. I was inside the store, still talking to the clerk. Before we left the gas station, I confessed what I saw in Bernalillo and what the clerk had just told me. We both were filled with dread, had goosebumps everywhere. We were almost too scared to even make our way home. We knew we'd be driving through nothingness, and likely in the dark at some point. But we knew more than anything, we shouldn't go to Vegas. After much debate, a lot of silence, and a creepy look or two from the clerk, we hit the road. We followed our advice, the clerk's advice, and we turned around. Driving home, we were on a mission, and we basically made it home on New Year's Eve. 2 days later, we read about a motel fire. It was at the motel that we were meant to stay at that night. 2 people were killed. I'm not saying that we could have been killed, but over 30 people were injured in that fire, so there's a good chance that we could have at least been one of those. Not sure what you'd call an event like this, but it's never left my mind, and I still have yet to go to Vegas for some reason. A few years ago, I was with my partner at the time, and we were on the freeway heading home, with her at the wheel. We made that commute every single day, and she knew it like the back of her hand, as the house was originally her parents' house that she'd grown up in. We were in our early 20s and moved in when they moved to a different state. It was so routine to the point of getting off on our exit out of habit, even if we needed to get off on a different one further up ahead. We were both just listening to the music, and I happened to make note of the time, and I looked up to see some landmark buildings and the shopping center that appear right before our exit, which meant that we were almost home. I can't explain it, but for a moment it just felt like I spaced out unprovoked really bad for what seemed to last only a second. And when I came to, we were a mile past our exit. For some reason, my ex and I both turned and looked at each other immediately in disbelief. We had both experienced it at the same time, and we were extremely confused as to why we were a mile past our exit when we were literally approaching the off-ramp. I'm talking like not even a half a mile away. And then I said, "We just missed our exit, but how does that make any sense? We were right there." And she said something along the lines of, "I know. I was getting ready to get onto the off-ramp lane when what the hell just happened?" I looked at the clock again and it was still the same time. Usually it takes 2 minutes to get to the following exit, so it's not like we had both managed to space out and miss the exit to the point of approaching the next one. Time-wise, it should have been 2 minutes past what I saw right before our exit, but it was the same. We couldn't get over it the whole night. We talked for hours about what could have happened, but ultimately settled on a glitch. To this day, I remember that moment vividly. Very strange. What you know will forever change on New Year's Day. This is not a warning, but a guarantee of what is to happen. My 5-year-old son told me this while I was buckling him into his car seat this morning. He spends the weekends with his father, and let's just say he's not the most responsible parent on the planet. Let's call him Adam. So after buckling my son up, snug and secure, I walked back into the house to calmly ask Adam why my baby angel is quoting end-of-the-world cautionaries in the backseat of my car right now. I was seriously about ready to call our mediator, but Adam promised me that he doesn't know where our son picked it up from. Adam's girlfriend, who we'll call Tina, steps onto the porch and says, "I swear, I wouldn't let that happen. Little man started saying it at breakfast." Tina also said that she walked into his room this morning to wake him up, but he was already awake, standing in the dark. When she turned on the light, he bent his head and gave her a really weird, side-eyed glare. Calling his name surrendered no reply. Apparently, it wasn't until she clapped her hands in front of his face when he snapped out of it. He then gave her the same message of impending doom, verbatim. And yeah, how could such precise choosing of words by a 5-year-old not get burned into your memory? Tina then asks my son, "What will change?" "Our time here," he answers. Tina says, "Here's the kicker. I say, 'Who told you this?' And he says, 'Past, Mommy.' Naturally, Tina thought he was talking about me, so out of respect, she dropped it. Some people tell their kids crazy things to behave. So with that, I reassure Tina that I'm not an apocalypse conspiracy theorist, and I head back to the car. During our drive home, I decided to inquire more about who this past mommy is. He says that she was the mom before me. I'm like, what? So by the end of our car ride home, in his broken 5-year-old English, I'm told about how he and his family were taking pictures on a mountain when it blew up. He casually wraps up the story by saying, "We all got hurt." Yikes, right? Well, oddly enough, I used to read a lot about reincarnation, and what he was saying sounded an awful lot like he was talking about a past life. I know it's not totally uncommon for kids to experience memories like this in adolescence. That part of the story oddly didn't unsettle me, but past mommy sticking around, that's a little bit too much. I go, "How much do you see past mommy?" "All the time," he says. "Okay, and what did she tell you today?" "What you know will forever change on New Year's Day. This is not a warning, but a guarantee of what is to happen." "And what does that mean?" I ask. He just shrugs and says, "I don't know." So, I just don't really know. What do I do about this? It's a whole lot to unpack, and I'm still trying to get him to learn the alphabet. I wanted to throw this story out there because, secretly, his foreboding sentence has given me extreme paranoia. Like, maybe past mommy is relaying a message through my son to me. And maybe it's supposed to give me this paranoia to the point of bringing me here, maybe to reach someone else out there. Again, yikes, right? I'm sure I'll feel better when it's 2022. For anyone that does find this, please be safe this New Year's and be careful. If you've been waiting on confirmation for a sign, this is it. Follow the signs. Years ago, I was working nights as a phlebotomist, person who draws your blood, in a hospital. There was this doctor who was notorious for ordering recurrent tests incorrectly. He would order a single draw when he really needed a serial draw 90% of the time. But because 1 in 10 times he really wanted a single draw, you always had to check with him. This night happened to be the end of daylight savings, so at 1:59 a.m., the clocks would turn to 3 a.m. instead of 2. At about 1:30, I get an order on my screen from this doctor. I was the only phleb on nights, and I worked with 2 techs. I signed and showed them, "Look, Dr. X ordered this test again. I'll see if he's on the floor and if he really wants this or a serial draw." I went up to that floor and he was at the nurse's station. I remember it so clearly because he was wearing plaid black and yellow skinny pants under his white coat. I couldn't stand the guy, and I thought his loud, ugly pants just drew attention to his loud, ugly personality. I walked up to him and said, "Hey, I just got this order for XYZ patient. Did you mean to order the 3 serial draws?" He was dismissive and said something like, "Of course I did. Can you just draw 3? I, of course, cannot just poke a patient 3 different times without orders, so I asked him if he could reorder it, and I'd go back to the lab to print the stickers and come right back to do the first draw. I drew a couple of patients quickly, knowing he'd take a few minutes to get the order in. I rode the elevator back to the lab and checked my computer. It was 1:58 and the orders were there, so I printed them and stuck my specimens in the centrifuge while they printed. I pulled the labels off the printer and looked closely and realized he had ordered the single draw again. I pulled up the order code, wrote it down for him, and went back to the floor to just ask him to order this exactly. When I got to the floor, He was standing exactly where he was when I had come up the first time, wearing plain black pants. I assumed some bodily fluid had forced him to change, and I knew he was going to be really annoyed when I asked him to reorder the labs. By now, it was definitely past 1:59, so the clocks were reading 3-something. I asked him if he could reorder the test. He was totally pleasant and not at all frustrated that I was asking him. I asked him if room 208 had thrown up on him or something, and if that's why he had to change. He then seemed offended and was like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Oh, sorry to offend. When I came up earlier, you had on yellow pants, so I assumed something happened." He scoffed at me and said, "I've been wearing these all night. I don't own yellow pants. You must be confused." I'm thinking that he's being weird and should just admit that he got puked on, but whatever. Go back to the lab, print the orders, and finally draw the patient. I stop to talk to one of the nurses for a moment on my way back down, and she says something like, "I saw you talking to Dr. X. He's being weird tonight, right?" And she seemed kind of shaken. I said, "Yeah, he was wearing those hideous pants and then tried to pretend that he wasn't." She told me he walked into a room on one side of the wing wearing the yellow pants right before the time change, and then walked out seconds later from the other side of the wing wearing black. I was weirded out. I went back down to the lab where the techs asked me where the samples were for the patients I'd drawn after asking Dr. X to reorder. I opened the centrifuge that I'd left them in, and they weren't in there. The orders showed that the labels had never been printed, and when I apologetically went to redraw the patients, they had no idea who I was, and they didn't have cotton and tape on their arm from when I'd drawn them earlier. I still have absolutely no explanation for this. It appears that everything between first receiving the incorrect order and returning to ask him to reorder for the second time never happened. The techs didn't remember me showing them that he had ordered incorrectly the first time or anything. The only reason I didn't check into a psychiatric facility was the nurse who corroborated my story. We hardly knew each other at the time, but we trauma bonded over the experience, and we've talked about it so many times. The weirdest part to me is that it coincided with daylight savings ending. That is completely a social construct. Nothing actually happens when we move the clock, so what the heck? I still get chills when I think about it or talk about it. And because people always question why I was so tuned in with the clocks and know exactly when things happened, I was a worker whose shift was an hour shorter that night. We all kind of watch the clock and do a mini celebration when it changes. I don't know if this counts as a glitch, but I've got no other explanation for this one. Also, when researching my own experience, I found that mine isn't the only one to involve butter. Yeah, that's right. Straight up cow's milk butter. Okay, anyways, here's what happened and when it happened. The year is 2008, New Year's Eve, Jacksonville, Oregon. Small place west of Medford, Oregon. Present at the time of the event is me, my little sister, and our cat. We're getting ready to make chocolate chip cookies like we do every year on New Year's Eve. And we're waiting for our mom to get home from the store with the noisemakers, sparkling cider, etc. She's taking forever. I tell my sister that mom's going to be home soon. Let's not start yet, blah blah. She's temporarily very disappointed. then turns and asks if we can watch the Polar Express for the umpteenth time because she's 7 and doesn't know real struggle. I put on the movie and then I go back to the kitchen to grab my charger. It's sometime after 5 and my mom calls, asking me to make sure the butter is soft enough. If it's not, she'll pick up more and warm it in the car. My mom and her cookies, man. She's serious. The butter has been on the counter since she made me take it out that morning at breakfast. So, all day. I essentially make eye contact with the butter. I touch it, ever so lightly, and I let her know the butter was plenty soft. And then I tell her she'd better hurry home if she wanted to micromanage this whole operation. She pretends to laugh. I laugh for real. I turn around and I walk back to the living room. We hang up. Then I realize, with the excitement of making myself laugh, I forgot my charger in the kitchen. I spin around, go to grab the charger, and I realize the butter is gone. It's not even possible. I think I must be looking at the wrong counter or something. So I turn and I look all over. I look on every counter, and it's just nowhere to be found. Fridge? No. I go to my sister. I check all around her, even though I know it's not even possible, unless she's a ghost or something. Eventually, I look inside of every cupboard, every drawer, every crevice. I even check the trash. My cat was sleeping the entire time in the living room, which is where my sister was. And I was, well, this whole story tells you where I was and what I did. Eventually, I called my mom to tell her to grab butter. At first, she was pretty pissed. Thought I was lying initially. She was a skeptic until she saw me face to face. She saw how relentless I was at trying to find it, and my sister too. We never found the butter. Well, everyone, thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing. That's all the stories we have for tonight. But join me every single Friday night for brand new stories. Follow The Darkest Hour on Instagram at thedarkesthouryt. Don't forget to subscribe and tell all your friends. I really appreciate it. If you've got stories like these, I'd love to share them. Send them to me. amandadarkesthour@gmail.com. Happy New Year and stay spooky.